Labour has gone to war on hope. Now, it might seem like an odd strategy, but they've certainly got a lot of message discipline. This was Wes Streeting in The Guardian on Sunday, or The Observer, I suppose. False hope is worse than no hope. Labour won't make promises it can't keep. Now, I didn't realise those were the only two options. So we could either have false hope or no hope. What about hope that might be fulfilled? That would be nice. Not what the Labour are offering. In the piece, he writes this: the only thing worse than no hope is false hope. It will disappoint some of our friends that we are not pledging support for every cause they believe in, but it would be so much more damaging to make promises now and then break them after the election. Ask the Lib Dems what far-fetched promises on tuition fees did for them. Of course, we have more recent example of someone who made a bunch of pledges they didn't keep. Streeting's current boss. Just think of the Lib Dems. What happened when they broke their promise on tuition fees? Yep. Starmer, the guy you see every day, he also broke a promise on tuition fees much more recently than the Lib Dems did. Starmer doesn't seem to want people to have hope, at least if the Sunday Times are to be believed. They reported this. Ed Miliband apparently gave an animated PowerPoint presentation to the Shadow Cabinet on his revolutionary energy policies, speaking excitedly of the hope and change he believed they would bring. His reception from Sir Keir Starmer, however, was decidedly lukewarm. Starmer thanked him for his presentation, but said he wasn't interested in hope and change. He was more interested in creating sustainable new jobs to replace jobs in old sectors that were being lost, said a source. He then said he was not interested in tree huggers before adding to everyone's surprise, "In fact, I hate tree huggers." The article goes on to say this: those close to the leader believe it is the economic challenge, not climate change, the party needs to focus on. They see Miliband as an eco-warrior who is more interested in the green agenda than the party's central priority of jobs, bills and energy security. A shadow cabinet minister said, quote, "Keir is always trying to anchor the party. Ed will always try to toe the line by saying that the party's priorities are jobs, bills, energy security and climate change in that order. He can't help himself. He is a hopey-changey kind of person, and we don't like hope or change in the current Labour Party." They also write this sort of in terms of who this seems to be down to. Morgan McSweeney, Labour's election chief, is frustrated by those in the party pushing the green policies. A source close to him, which essentially tends to mean that they've endorsed the comment themselves, said, quote, "He sees everything through the prism of electoral success. He sees everything else as a distraction. He wants to throw the excess baggage off the boat and just concentrate on the economy." Of course, lots of this could just be dismissed as a debate about pre-election messaging. Do we want our message to be about the economy, or do we want our message to be about climate change? But there was another briefing, a separate Sunday Times story that was more worrying when it comes to the policy question. So it's this: Labour will copy Tory tax and spending plans if elected. So the article quotes a Shadow Cabinet member saying Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves won't be making any major tax pledges and that Starmer has no intention of raising taxes on high earners. And that claim about sticking to Tory spending plans as well as their tax plans is even more striking, I think. Now, it led Laura Kuenssberg to ask Rachel Reeves if Labour were just offering austerity Mark II.
The last time we had a government that said fiscal rules, spending limits were at the top of the list, the way they dealt with that was to introduce austerity. And by your analysis, you've written, austerity starved the economy of the investment it needs to grow. Austerity failed. But listening to you today, if spending limits, those fiscal rules at the top of your list, by your logic, you might make the same mistake again.
No, this is nothing like what the Conservatives did. It's why, for example, the borrowing to invest is different from borrowing to pay for day-to-day spending. Investing in assets that can grow our economy, it is essential if we want to break out of this doom loop of low growth, high taxes.
But you've just said you'll only do that if you can afford to.
Well,
and isn't it the case? And you're very proud, I think, of being disciplined on this. But isn't it the case that that discipline means going into the next election, it's very likely that Labour and the Conservatives will basically be following the same kind of tram lines on spending?
I don't accept that at all. If you look, for example, what we've said around taxation of non-doms, I believe if you make your home in Britain, you should pay your taxes here.
You know that's a marginal issue. Important to some people,
Laura,
but you know that's a small amount of cash in the overall thing.
I don't think £3.5 billion a year is marginal. And we've said that we would use that money to invest in one of the biggest ever workforce expansions in the NHS. You had Steve Barclay on this programme last week. He said that he had an NHS workforce plan. but he had no idea how it was going to be funded. Labour do. We would fund it through that non-dom tax status being revoked. That is a tax loophole that has existed for 200 years. Labour would close it to invest in our public services. That's the difference between Labour and Conservatives. I explain how our sums add up, and I close loopholes if they don't work for working people and use them for the priorities that we see, the priorities for this country.
And just yes or no, are you disputing then a suggestion, a report in the Sunday Times this morning that basically your spending plans are on the same track as Conservatives? You dispute that?
Well, they're not on the same track. I've just given you one example, but there are others as well. But I am absolutely committed to fiscal discipline. And I have no desire to see the tax burden on working people increase. In fact, I would like the tax burden on working people to be lower, but it all has to be built on that rock of economic and fiscal stability, because if you put that at peril, then you see what's happened in our economy these last few months with sky-high interest rates and inflation that is very difficult to get under control.
So the argument there, Labour will be different from the Tories because they will borrow to invest. Now, that makes sense, that's coherent. However, their self-imposed fiscal rules mean that the size of such an investment is also in doubt. So if you say we're going to borrow to invest, that's fine, but they've got this fiscal rule, which is that debt has to also be falling, and that includes borrowing to invest. So this is Reeves on the Laura Kuenssberg Show again.
Last time you came on this programme, you said that you'd be spending £28 billion a year on green projects. You said it was crucial, and you said it needed urgency. Now, since you came on last, that has now been delayed. Are you 100% committed to reaching that level of spending, £28 billion a year, by the end of the first Parliament if you win the election?
I can't overstate the damage the Conservatives have done to the economy, but I'm not going to apologise for making sure that our sums add up. And since I first announced Labour's Green Prosperity plans, interest rates have gone up 13 times. Inflation's now at 8.7%, seems to be stuck there, been there for the last 2 months. And I've always been clear that all our policies, including investing in the industries of the future and boosting our energy security, are subject to our fiscal rules, which means paying for day-to-day spending through tax receipts and getting debt down as a share of our economy.
So that explains the delay, but my question is, are you committed to spending that £28 billion by the end of your first Parliament if you win the election?
We're confident that we can get there, but all of our plans will always be... Yeah, we're committed to it, but it's subject to our fiscal rules. And that's really, really important to say that.
And those are your limits on spending, that jargon.
Yes, and what I say is that you pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts and you get debt down as a share of the economy. David Gauke made a really good point on the panel earlier. Debt has tripled under the Conservatives. Debt is now the same size as our whole economy. We've got to get a grip of that, and all of our plans will be consistent with those fiscal rules.
So Aaron, 2 points here. I suppose one, this war on hope. So there's lots of people in the Labour Party that want you to know, don't have hope, don't be hopeful. We're not interested in hope. And then I suppose the question of the fiscal rules and the one that really matters here, I think. So saying you're not going to borrow for day-to-day spending is fine. You're going to borrow to invest. That makes sense. The one that seems like it's going to cause a real problem is that they need debt to be falling as a proportion of GDP. Now, the only way you can make that happen is if we have much faster growth than we're currently having now. And to me, there's a sort of chicken-egg problem. Because for me, I would say, to bring about the growth, what you need to do, you need to borrow to invest. But they're saying we're not going to borrow to invest until we have growth. And then the hope, I suppose, is that a little bit of planning reform and a couple of other things that don't cost any money, that will bring the growth. And then by the end of Parliament, they'll be able to borrow some money to invest. I mean, it's a bit of a mess, isn't it?
It's a hope and a prayer. It's a hope and a prayer. These are the same people that talk about deglobalization and decoupling from China in terms of global supply chains. If you think inflation is bad right now, wait till what inflation would be like if we tried to decouple from China, if we weren't importing consumer durables and electronics from East and Southeast Asia. Inflation will be much higher. So it's a very strange way to talk. On the one hand, deglobalization, we've already extricated ourselves from one of the world's leading sources of hydrocarbons, although it impacted us less than the rest of Europe, really. We're now about to do the same with the world's leading industrial manufacturer. It's deeply concerning, Michael. The £28 billion commitment has gone. It doesn't exist. If there is not growth of circa 2% a year, it's not happening. In other words, it's not happening. You might get a bonanza year, a high growth year because we've had so many poor years. Let's say best case scenario, Labour win the election. There's no massive food shortages, no energy shortages, sweet spot of good weather but not bad weather, no geopolitical problems. Russia, Ukraine is resolved quite quickly. Things don't inflame with China. Nothing happens with Tehran. Yeah, for 1 year, you might get 2-3% GDP growth. Yeah, 1 year. But we are now in a terminally low period of economic growth. And that's broadly the case for most of the West. It's not the case in the United States because it's enormous. It's a continent. It's a massive exporter of food, has a huge technology sector, and it's a massive exporter of energy. But for France, for Italy, for Germany, for the countries who are kind of like us, they have not seen the kinds of growth that I think Labour are now almost expecting for when they come to power. So I think it is deeply concerning, Michael. And quickly on that point of Keir Starmer saying he hates tree huggers, I have a hypothesis as to why, Michael. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, I would.
Think about it. He doesn't like to hug trees because he has a pollen allergy, which would explain the fact that his nostrils are constantly blocked and he sounds like he needs Beckonase. So look, if I was in his boots, I would hate trees too. I would hate all kinds of nature. But as it is, actually, I'm a bit lucky. I outgrew my pollen allergy as a kid. And I love British nature, Michael. I love to go out to the forests and to the woods and to the beach and to the coasts and rivers. Here, get out of your London SUV. I know it's a hybrid, but it's still an SUV. And go to the great outdoors. You might change your mind.
I love a parsimonious explanation, and I think that counts as one. Rachel Reeves is also the subject of a long profile in The Guardian. The interview by Simon Hatterston touched on the case of North Tyne Mayor Jamie Driscoll, who was barred from standing as mayor of the North East because he shared a platform with Ken Loach. And this is how journalist Simon Hatterston describes the conversation. I tell her I am Jewish and that I agree with a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism, but the party is so gung-ho that it is now labelling people anti-Semitic who simply aren't, and there is a danger of destroying lives in the process. Well, look, I'm not on the bodies that make those decisions, so I don't know the details of that case. But it is so important that we are seen to, and we do, tackle anti-Semitism. Ken Loach, you might like his films, but his views, well, certainly, they are not ones I share. So that was the quote from Rachel Reeves. Simon Hatterston says, that doesn't make him anti-Semitic. And then Rachel Reeves says, you don't think Ken Loach is anti-Semitic? Okay, well, I think we might have to agree to differ. Simon Hatterston asks, why does she think he is anti-Semitic? Rachel Reeves says, look, I'm not on the bodies that make these decisions, but I think it's right we have a zero-tolerance approach. She repeats, you can't make such an accusation without supporting it, I say. And Rachel Reeves says, well, look, I'm not on the body who makes these decisions. And she repeats that again. Loach later tells me there was no due process in his expulsion. He was just told he was unfit to be a party member. Anti-Semitism wasn't mentioned. It's not very forensic, is it, Aaron? She's sort of saying, Ken Loach, he's anti-Semitic. I'm not going to give you any evidence to back that up.
No, she's meant to be this stellar economist, clever social scientist, so clever. All she does is play chess. Some people have to pull her away from playing chess. They go, Rachel, you're the Shadow Chancellor. Don't forget that. Stop playing chess all the time. Please. You've got an interview with Simon Hatterston. Don't worry, I'm 4 moves away from checkmate. She's this clever forensic woman. And yet when somebody says, well, look, surely it's quite a bad thing to be a racist. If you're going to call somebody a racist, there clearly has to be at least the threshold where you can explain why they're a racist. No, too much. And I think that says something about both Rachel Reeves, the political culture inside the Labour Party, particularly in relation to the Labour establishment, but also the media. She's probably never been asked that question, ever. X person is a racist. Why? Oh God, I don't know. Can we talk about chess, please? Can we talk about how I was a school chess champion? Did you know I'm good at chess? So I think it's a real indictment on the media that those aren't the kinds of questions that are... It's a basic question, right? If you call somebody a racist and somebody else says, well, that's really to their detriment. That's going to tarnish them as they go forward. You are a very senior person in public life. Could you care to explain why you think that? And they can't. I mean, my God, what does that tell you about the caliber and the lack of morals and scruples and principle when it comes to the kinds of people in our political class? It tells a hell of a lot. I think it's the kinds of people you don't really meet in everyday life. That is very unusual behavior, Michael. The people watching this, listening as a podcast later on, how many people do you meet on a day-to-day basis who would call somebody out there a racist and then not be able to explain why? That's very, very unusual. But for our politicians and most of the media, it's the norm.